Dear friends, if this story touches your heart, I humbly ask, please take just 2 seconds to like this video and subscribe to the Duchess's Secret. Every subscription helps me continue creating these stories for you, and your comment telling me where you're watching from would truly make my day. It costs you nothing but means everything to me. Sometimes survival requires trusting a stranger over those who claim to love you. Sacred Heart, Cathedral, Somerset, England. April morning, 1832. The antechamber of Sacred Heart Cathedral reeked of incense and gardenias, but all Beatrice could detect was iron, the bitter taste of terror filling her mouth. Beyond the carved mahogany doors, 300 guests waited in anticipatory silence. At any moment, the pipe organ would roar to life, and she would be compelled to march toward a destiny more terrible than death. The bridal gown was magnificent agony. Cascades of cream satin and Brussels lace constricted her chest beneath stays cinched so severely she struggled to breathe. The seamstress had proclaimed it perfection. Beatrice deemed it a cage from which there was no escape. "Miss Beatrice," Clara's urgent whisper pierced her spiraling panic. Her chambermaid, her sole genuine companion since youth, appeared beside her, complexion ashen as parchment. In Clara's shaking grasp lay an envelope, its wax seal already cracked. "You must see this, immediately." Clara thrust it into Beatrice's gloved palm. "I discovered it in Mr. Whitmore's private office this morning." Clara. "I cannot. The ceremony commences in moments. Read it." The desperation in Clara's tone made Beatrice's hands tremble as she opened the correspondence. The penmanship was masculine, clipped, belonging to one who prioritized efficiency over courtesy. Whitmore. Arrangements confirmed with Dr. Thornton at Riverside Sanitarium. Isolated chamber ready per our agreement. Upon marriage and inheritance transfer, commitment documents will be executed under diagnosis of nervous hysteria. Routine matter requires husband's signature alone. Family approval unnecessary by statute. Following 9 months isolation, you may eliminate her however you deem appropriate. My compensation stands at £7,000, half upon admission, remainder after final disposition. Burn this letter. Dr. Harold Pemberton. The antechamber swayed. Beatrice seized the oak bench beside her, splinters snagging on her silk gloves. "There's additional evidence," Clara whispered, extracting a second document. "I located this in your guardian's desk. Financial accounts." The figures blurred before Beatrice's vision, but certain amounts emerged with horrifying clarity. Gaming obligations, Carlton House, £58,000. Creditors requiring settlement by July 15th. Total estate worth upon Beatrice's marriage, £65,000. £65,000. The inheritance from her parents' textile enterprises, held in trust until her 28th birthday, or until matrimony, when it would transfer to her husband's possession. The recollection washed over her like the wave that had taken her parents 14 years prior. She'd been 13 when the tempest struck off Bristol. One instant. Mother had been humming while father jested about his abysmal navigation. The next, existence had fractured into howling gales and brine. Beatrice had gripped debris for endless hours, shrieking their names until her voice perished, until the merchant vessel discovered her at first light. Guardian Thomas had materialized at her bedside with vacant eyes and a barrister. "Your parents' holdings are considerable," he'd stated, straightening his waistcoat. "I shall administer them until you mature, or wed, naturally." She should have recognized, should have questioned why he'd insisted so forcefully on this match, why he'd rejected every gentleman who'd courted her genuinely and presented Mr. Edmund Whitmore, a widower of 46 with eyes like frozen slate, as her only acceptable prospect. His previous wife, Beatrice heard herself articulate. Clara, her cause of death? Clara's silence provided the answer. The organ's opening note resonated, a profound, commanding summons that trembled through the foundation. The wedding procession. Her funeral march. The Baron of Ashford's coach, Clara said frantically, gripping Beatrice's shoulders. It's in the courtyard, the one bearing the hawk insignia. I observed his driver leave it unsecured while he entered the inn. The Baron travels to his manor in Devon. You're proposing Beatrice couldn't complete the notion. It was insanity. I'm proposing you survive. Clara's eyes blazed with devoted intensity. That letter indicates Mr. Whitmore intends to imprison you the instant you exchange vows. 9 months in a sanitarium, then. She swallowed forcefully. Miss Beatrice, his previous wife, entered Riverside too. She never returned. The organ swelled. Through the door she heard guests rising to their feet. Beatrice gazed downward at herself, at the white roses threaded through her hair, their cloying fragrance now the scent of her burial, at the crystal beads adorning her bodice, each one a minute anchor dragging her toward destruction, at her hands, pallid and quivering in their kid leather gloves. She'd always been compliant, respectable, the ideal ward, never challenging Guardian Thomas's decisions even when something in Whitmore's expression, in how his stare assessed her like merchandise to be appraised, made her stomach revolt. She'd dismissed her own intuition, convinced herself she was being irrational, theatrical, that marriage meant obligation, not affection, that her unease was merely maiden anxiety. How many women had committed the same lethal error? The antechamber door handle began rotating, Guardian Thomas arriving to deliver her down the aisle. Beatrice clutched Clara's hand. Accompany me. Miss Beatrice, please. Clara's face dissolved with relief. The service entrance, quickly. They fled. The voluminous skirts threatened to topple her with each stride, the corset suffocating her lungs. But Beatrice didn't halt. Behind them, she heard Guardian Thomas's cry of alarm, the sudden bewildered murmur of attendees. April sunlight dazzled her as they erupted into the courtyard. There, the coach with its hawk crest, glossy ebony lacquer gleaming like a shadowed covenant. Clara wrenched the portal open. Beatrice gathered her skirts in frantic handfuls and ascended inside, Clara scrambling after her. The compartment smelled of leather and pipe tobacco and something else, something untamed, like wind across highlands. Depart, Clara shouted to the coachman, who'd materialized looking mystified. Medical crisis! The lady requires a physician in Devon. Whether he credited it or was simply startled into compliance, the coachman mounted his seat. The coach lurched forward. Through the window, Beatrice witnessed Guardian Thomas burst from the cathedral, his countenance crimson with fury. Edmund Whitmore appeared beside him, and for one dreadful instant, their gazes locked across the courtyard. His expression wasn't astonishment or wounded pride. It was frigid, calculated wrath, the appearance of a man whose asset had just vanished. Then the coach rounded the corner, and Sacred Heart Cathedral disappeared from sight. Beatrice pressed her hand to her corseted ribs, feeling her heart pound against whalebone supports. What had she accomplished? She'd just climbed into a stranger's coach wearing a bridal gown, valued more than most families earned in 5 years, with no strategy beyond flight, and no knowledge of who might await at journey's conclusion. Sometimes survival requires trusting a stranger over those who claim to love you. She could only hope she'd chosen wisely. The coach wheels rattled over cobblestones, each revolution transporting Beatrice farther from the only existence she'd ever known. Clara clutched her hand with bruising force, but neither woman spoke. What could be said? They'd just abandoned Beatrice's own wedding, commandeered a baron's coach, and were now racing toward what? Precisely, Devon. Clara had mentioned the baron traveled to Devon. That was their entire knowledge. Through the window, Somerset's verdant landscape blurred past. Cathedral spires and stone cottages yielded to undulating hills scattered with cattle. The April morning remained painfully beautiful, indifferent to Beatrice's shattered world. "Miss Beatrice," Clara's voice trembled. "What shall we do upon arrival?" Beatrice opened her mouth, but no response emerged. She'd acted on pure instinct, the primal terror of prey sensing the snare. Now that terror was receding, replaced by the stark reality of her circumstances. No funds, no garment save this stifling bridal gown, no strategy whatsoever beyond escape. She contemplated the letter still clutched in her hand. Following 9 months' isolation, you may eliminate her however you deem appropriate. Eliminate, as though she were contaminated provisions to be discarded. Whitmore's previous wife had entered Riverside Sanitarium. She'd never emerged. Beatrice pressed her free hand against her abdomen, battling nausea. How long had that unfortunate woman endured? Had she screamed for assistance? Pleaded to be trusted when she insisted she wasn't deranged? The sanitarium physicians wouldn't have heeded. They never did. A husband's testimony was absolute, and nervous hysteria, that expedient diagnosis, could signify anything from genuine madness to simple defiance, to desiring control of one's own inheritance. "At least we're breathing," Beatrice whispered. "That's more than Whitmore intended." The coach struck a depression. Both women gasped, gripping their seats as they were flung sideways. When they righted themselves, Clara's face had gone ghostly. "Miss Beatrice, the coachman. Upon arrival, he'll inform the Baron what we've done, that we seized his coach under false circumstances." Her voice dropped to barely audible. "They could have us prosecuted for larceny." The words settled like lead in Beatrice's stomach. Naturally. How had she not considered it? In her panic, she'd committed a felony. They both had. And barons possessed the authority to see criminals prosecuted to the fullest measure of law. But surely any reasonable man would comprehend once she explained. Would he, though? She was the absconding bride of a respectable gentleman, making wild accusations about sanitariums and murder conspiracies. She possessed no evidence beyond a letter that Whitmore would declare fabricated. Guardian Thomas would testify she'd gone mad with wedding day hysteria. Whitmore himself would appear the injured party, abandoned at the altar by an unstable woman. Who would credit her? A man she'd never encountered, or the upstanding guardian who'd raised her for 14 years? The answer made her throat constrict. "We'll cast ourselves on his compassion," Beatrice said, hearing the false confidence in her own voice. "We'll explain everything. Surely a baron has the power to aid us somehow." Clara didn't appear convinced, but she nodded. The landscape grew wilder as they journeyed, Somerset's gentle farmland yielding to Devon's primordial forests. Beatrice watched twisted elms pass by, their branches still barren in early spring, like skeletal digits grasping at the heavens. How fitting. She felt equally stripped, vulnerable, exposed. Her thoughts drifted to the wedding gown she'd abandoned. Not abandoned. She still wore the cursed thing, corset crushing her ribs with each breath. But in her mind, she saw it as she'd left it, Pristine cream satin pooled on stone floors, white roses scattered like morning flowers. What were the guests doing presently? Guardian Thomas would have announced some pretext. Bride taken ill, ceremony delayed. He couldn't acknowledge she'd fled. The scandal would obliterate him socially, eliminate any chance of recovering his gaming losses. But eventually, the truth would surface. And when it did, he and Whitmore would come searching for her. The thought made her shiver despite the warm coach interior. Hours elapsed. The sun ascended higher, then began its gradual descent. Beatrice's body ached from sitting, her stomach hollow with hunger. Neither she nor Clara had eaten since yesterday's supper. She'd been too anxious for breakfast, and then everything had transpired so rapidly. "We should have brought provisions," Clara muttered, voicing Beatrice's own thoughts. "And currency. And, oh, Miss Beatrice, we should have brought something besides ourselves." "We had 3 minutes to choose between safety and death," Beatrice said quietly. "We chose correctly." But had they? This coach was conveying them toward an unknown man in an unfamiliar place. For all she knew, the Baron of Ashford could be worse than Whitmore. He could be cruel, or apathetic, or simply unwilling to involve himself in a stranger's troubles. The coach began to decelerate. Beatrice's heart lurched. Through the window she glimpsed towering stone walls, iron gates standing ajar. An estate, then. A magnificent one, judging by the length of the drive they were now traversing. Centuries-old trees lined the path, their branches forming a tunnel of shadow. Between them, Beatrice caught glimpses of manicured lawns, granite fountains, a manor house in the distance that made Guardian Thomas's Somerset estate appear like a cottage. "We've arrived," Clara breathed. The coach rolled to a halt. Beatrice heard the coachman descend, his boots crunching on gravel. Voices outside, male, authoritative, discussing something about the horses, then footsteps approaching the coach door. Beatrice seized Clara's hand again. Her pulse thundered in her ears, so deafening she was certain everyone in Devon must hear it. The door handle rotated. Golden afternoon light flooded the interior. A footman stood there, livery immaculate, face professionally neutral. His eyes swept over them, over Beatrice's elaborate bridal dress and Clara's simpler traveling clothes, and something flickered in his expression. Surprise? Confusion? "His lordship," the footman said slowly, "was not anticipating passengers." Before Beatrice could formulate a response, another voice cut through the air. Deep, cultivated, carrying the weight of unquestioned authority. "William, what's the delay?" The Baron of Ashford had arrived. Nicholas Hartwell, Baron of Ashford, knew something was amiss the moment his coach rolled through the gates. It wasn't anything obvious, not to most men. But Nicholas had spent 4 years learning to notice what others overlooked. It was how he'd stayed alive. He stood in the courtyard of Ashford Hall, watching his coach approach. The ancient manor rose behind him, all grey stone and Gothic turrets clawing at the Devon sky. Home, though it had felt more like a mausoleum since the poisoning. "My lord." His steward, Pemberton, bowed. "Welcome back. I trust your affairs in London concluded satisfactorily?" "Adequately enough." Nicholas's eyes remained on the coach. "Something's wrong." Pemberton frowned. "My lord?" The vehicle sat lower on its springs than it should. Not much, perhaps 2 inches. Most men wouldn't notice. But Nicholas had spent months studying minute details, searching for the truth no one else wanted to acknowledge. 2 inches meant weight. Weight meant cargo he hadn't authorized. And then there was the fragrance. White roses, faint but unmistakable, carried on the April breeze and wrong season entirely. Someone had been in his coach wearing white rose perfume. His hand moved instinctively to his throat, fingers tracing the network of scars that ran from collarbone to jaw. The poisoning had marked him inside and out. Society called him a hermit now, a gothic phantom haunting his own estate. They whispered about how the Baron of Ashford had lost his betrothed to poison 4 years ago, and his sanity shortly after. Let them whisper. Nicholas knew the truth. Victoria's death had been no accident, and whoever had murdered her thought they'd gotten away with it. He would prove them wrong, eventually. But first, he had an unexpected passenger to address. "Wait here," he told Pemberton, striding toward the coach. William, his footman, stood frozen by the open door, clearly uncertain how to proceed. Nicholas waved him aside and peered into the interior. There, on the floor, partially concealed beneath the bench seat, a flash of cream satin, a woman's foot, still clad in a delicate silk slipper. Nicholas reached in and pulled back the travel blanket someone had hastily arranged as camouflage. Two women stared up at him with identical expressions of terror. The first, a maid, judging by her dress, clutched the hand of the second woman, who was clearly no servant. Even disheveled, dusty, and trembling, she was striking. Auburn hair tumbled from what had once been an elaborate coiffure. Her gown was exquisite despite its current state. Cream satin embroidered with crystal beads, though the lace at the hem was torn and the skirts crushed beyond repair. A bridal dress. Nicholas's gaze moved to her face, fair skin, wide green eyes, a mouth pressed thin with fear, and recognition struck him. He'd seen her portrait in the society pages. Lady Beatrice Ashton, the Somerset heiress. Old textile fortune, if memory served. She'd been engaged to some merchant or other. Whitmore, Edmund Whitmore. A man Nicholas had met once at his club and instinctively despised. "Please," she whispered, and her voice trembled like a sparrow's wing. "Please don't send me back." Nicholas studied her. The torn dress suggested flight, not leisure. The white roses in her hair, bridal flowers, were wilting. Her hands, though clearly those of a gentlewoman, bore fresh scratches, as if she'd torn through brambles or climbed into this coach in desperate haste. And her eyes. God, her eyes held the kind of terror he'd seen in Victoria's face the night she died. "What are you fleeing from?" His voice came out harsher than intended, damaged vocal cords courtesy of the poison's effects. She flinched at the sound, and something in Nicholas's chest twisted. He'd forgotten how people reacted to him now, to the scars, the ruined voice, the specter of the man he'd been. "My wedding." Her words tumbled out in a rush. "My death. They're identical." Not the answer he'd expected. Nicholas's mind worked rapidly, cataloging details: the bridal dress, the terror, the maid who clearly knew her well enough to flee with her. This wasn't a bride's cold feet. This was something darker. "Explain," he said. She glanced at Pemberton and William, both watching with undisguised curiosity. Nicholas caught her meaning immediately. "Leave us," he ordered. When both men hesitated, his voice dropped to command. "Now." They retreated, though not far enough for Nicholas's liking. But it would have to suffice. Beatrice drew a shaking breath. "My guardian, he arranged the marriage. I discovered this morning that Mr. Whitmore intends to commit me to a sanitarium after our wedding, to access my inheritance." Her hand moved to her bodice, producing a crumpled letter. "I have proof." Nicholas took the paper, his scarred fingers careful not to touch hers. He read quickly. Dr. Harold Pemberton, Riverside Sanitarium. The words sent ice down his spine. Following 9 months isolation, you may eliminate her however you deem appropriate. Eliminate. He knew that word. Knew what it meant when men spoke of inconvenient brides. Victoria had discovered something 4 years ago, some financial irregularity in Nicholas's late father's accounts. She'd told Nicholas she needed more time to investigate before making accusations. 3 days later, she'd collapsed at dinner, poisoned by arsenic in her wine. The magistrate had called it an accident, a contaminated bottle. But Victoria had been careful about everything she consumed. She'd been cautious by nature. Nicholas had spent 4 years searching for proof of murder. 4 years watching shadows, investigating servants, questioning everyone who'd been at Ashford that night. And he'd found nothing concrete, nothing that would stand up in court. But he knew. Victoria had been murdered because she'd known too much. Just as this woman would be murdered, slowly, legally, behind sanitarium walls, because she stood between her guardian and £65,000. "How did you know about my coach?" he asked. "My maid saw it. In the cathedral courtyard. We had minutes before—" Her voice broke. "I'm sorry. I know it was theft. I know you could have us arrested, but I didn't know where else to—" "Stop." Nicholas held up one scarred hand. He'd failed Victoria. Failed to see the danger until too late. Failed to protect her when she'd needed him most. He wouldn't make that mistake again. "You'll come inside," he said, his voice rough but certain. "We'll talk properly. Then I'll decide what's to be done." "My lord, can you walk?" She nodded, though her legs shook visibly as he offered his hand. Her maid scrambled out first, then Beatrice placed her small, trembling fingers in his scarred palm. The touch burned, not painfully, differently, like recognition. He pulled her from the coach, steadying her when she stumbled. Up close, he could see the exhaustion in her face, the tear tracks through dust on her cheeks, the desperate hope warring with terror in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. Nicholas said nothing. He simply offered his arm and led her toward Ashford Hall's imposing doors. Behind them, the coach stood empty. Ahead, the manor waited. Dark, Gothic, full of shadows. And somewhere in Somerset, he knew, men were already searching for the bride who'd disappeared. Mrs. Blackwell had served as Ashford's housekeeper for 40 years. In that time, she'd witnessed births, deaths, scandals, and tragedies. But never had she seen his lordship stride through the main doors with a disheveled woman in a torn bridal dress clinging to his arm. "Mrs. Blackwell," Nicholas's voice carried the authority that brooked no questions. "This is Lady Beatrice Ashton. She requires a bath, food, and appropriate clothing. See to it immediately." The housekeeper's mouth opened, closed, then opened again. "My lord, of course. This way, my lady." Beatrice glanced back at Nicholas as Mrs. Blackwell led her toward the west wing staircase. He nodded once, a gesture of reassurance, then turned to Pemberton. "Send riders to Somerset. Discreet inquiries about Mr. Edmund Whitmore and Lord Thomas Ashton. I want to know their movements, their associates, and any whispers of scandal attached to either name." He paused. "And send someone to fetch the lady's maid from wherever she's hiding. Tell her she's safe here." Pemberton's eyebrows rose. "Her maid is following on horseback, I assume. No woman flees her wedding alone without loyal help." Nicholas moved toward his study. "Find her before Whitmore does." 3 hours later, Clara was discovered on the road to Devon, exhausted and terrified. By evening, she sat in Nicholas's library, hands wrapped around a cup of tea she hadn't touched, recounting the entire conspiracy. "The letter was concealed in Mr. Whitmore's chambers," she explained, her voice steadier now that she was warm and safe. "I'd gone to retrieve Miss Beatrice's handkerchief. She'd left it there during her last visit, and I saw papers scattered on his desk. I shouldn't have looked, but—" She swallowed hard. "Something compelled me to look." Nicholas studied the letter again, his scarred fingers tracing the words. "Eliminate her however you deem appropriate. Clinical, businesslike, as though Beatrice were livestock, not a living woman." "Dr. Harold Pemberton," he murmured. "I know that name. He testified at a sanitarium inquiry 7 years ago. The investigation found nothing, but rumors persisted about patients who entered his care and never left." Clara paled. "Then it's true. He would have—" "Yes." Nicholas set the letter aside. "He would have killed her, eventually, after your guardian accessed the inheritance." A knock interrupted them. Beatrice stood in the doorway, transformed. Mrs. Blackwell had found her a gown of deep emerald, one of Victoria's, Nicholas realized with a sharp pang. It fit reasonably well, though Beatrice was taller than his late betrothed had been. Her auburn hair was clean now, pinned in a simple style that revealed the elegant line of her neck. She looked like herself again, except for her eyes, which still held shadows of the terror she'd escaped. "Clara," Beatrice crossed to her maid, embracing her fiercely. "Thank God you're safe." "Thanks to his lordship," Clara murmured. Beatrice turned to Nicholas. In the library's candlelight, his scars were more visible, ridges of damaged tissue that ran from his left collarbone down to his jaw, disappearing beneath his collar. She didn't flinch, didn't look away, simply met his gaze directly. "Why are you helping me?" she asked quietly. "You don't know me. This isn't your concern." Nicholas gestured to the chair across from his desk. Clara, understanding dismissal when she heard it, slipped from the room. When they were alone, Nicholas poured 2 glasses of brandy and offered one to Beatrice. She accepted without comment, another mark of her unusual character. Most well-bred ladies would refuse spirits. "4 years ago," he began, settling into his own chair. "My betrothed Victoria died from poisoning. The magistrate ruled it accidental. A contaminated bottle at dinner." Beatrice sipped her brandy, listening. Victoria was cautious about everything she consumed, had been since childhood, when she witnessed someone fall ill at a banquet. She would never drink from an unverified bottle. He paused, remembering. 3 days before the poisoning, she discovered irregularities in my late father's financial accounts. Nothing proven yet, but enough to make her suspicious. She told me she needed more time to investigate. "And then she died," Beatrice whispered. "And then she died, conveniently, before she could expose whoever had been embezzling from the Ashford estate." Nicholas's hand tightened on his glass. "I've spent 4 years investigating, 4 years searching for proof. And I've found nothing concrete, nothing that would stand in court. But you know she was murdered." "I know." He met her gaze. "Just as I know your guardian and Mr. Whitmore intend to murder you. Legally, perhaps, hidden behind sanitarium walls, but murder nonetheless." Beatrice was quiet for a long moment. "I should have seen it," she said finally. "There were signs. Whitmore's eyes, they were always so cold. And Guardian Thomas's insistence that I marry quickly, that I not wait until 28 when the trust would be mine outright." She laughed bitterly. "I dismissed my own instincts, told myself I was being dramatic." "Most women are trained from birth to dismiss their instincts," Nicholas said. To trust male authority over their own judgment. It's how men like Whitmore succeed. She looked at him with something like gratitude. You understand. I failed Victoria because I didn't take her concerns seriously enough. I thought she was exaggerating the danger. His voice roughened. I won't make that mistake again. The library door burst open. Pemberton stood there, slightly out of breath, holding a telegram. My lord, news from Somerset. Nicholas took the paper, read quickly, his jaw tightened. What is it? Beatrice asked. Whitmore is searching for you frantically. He's already involved magistrates, claiming you're mentally unstable, that you fled in a state of hysteria and may harm yourself. Nicholas's eyes met hers. Your guardian is offering a substantial reward for information on your whereabouts. Beatrice's face drained of color. Then I've brought danger to your door. I should leave. And go where? Nicholas's voice was sharp. You have no money, no legal standing. As an unmarried woman under 28, you're still under your guardian's legal authority. He can have you forcibly returned. There must be something. There is. Nicholas set the telegram aside carefully. Marriage ends guardianship. The moment you wed, your guardian loses all legal claim to you. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Beatrice's eyes widened. I'm not proposing, Nicholas said quickly. Not yet. I'm simply stating the legal reality. It's the only protection that would... Pemberton cleared his throat. My lord, there's more. What? Lord Thomas and Mr. Whitmore departed Somerset this afternoon. They're traveling with a magistrate and 8 armed men. Pemberton's face was grim. They'll arrive at Ashford tomorrow morning. The brandy glass slipped from Beatrice's fingers, shattering on the floor. Dear lovelies, if you followed this journey to this point, I'm truly grateful. Please, if this story has moved you, take just a moment to subscribe to the Duchess's Secret. It helps me continue creating these stories. A simple like or comment about which character you connect with most would mean the world to me. Dawn broke over Ashford Hall, painting the stone walls in shades of gray and gold. Beatrice hadn't slept. She'd lain in Victoria's borrowed bed, staring at the canopy above, listening to the ancient house settle and creak around her. When she could bear it no longer, she wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and descended to the library. She found Nicholas there, still in yesterday's clothes, papers scattered across his desk. He looked up as she entered, and she saw her own exhaustion mirrored in his eyes. They'll be here soon, he said simply. They were. By mid-morning, the sound of horses reached the manor. Beatrice stood at Nicholas's study window, watching a party of riders approach through the morning mist. She recognized Guardian Thomas's gray stallion. Whitmore rode beside him on a chestnut mare, his posture rigid with barely contained fury. Behind them came a man in magistrate's robes, flanked by 8 armed men. Nicholas appeared at her shoulder. Stay here. This is my fight, which is why you'll stay here. His voice was gentle but firm. Trust me. She watched him stride across the courtyard to meet them at the gates. From this distance, she couldn't hear words, only the rise and fall of voices, Guardian Thomas's imperious tone, Whitmore's clipped precision, Nicholas's deeper, rougher responses. Pemberton materialized beside her, his face carefully neutral. His lordship is informing them that Lady Beatrice is his guest, under his protection. And they're saying that he's harboring a fugitive, that you fled your wedding in a state of mental instability, that Mr. Whitmore, as your betrothed, has legal authority to... Pemberton stopped, uncomfortable. To commit me to a sanitarium, Beatrice finished. I know. Below, Guardian Thomas's face had turned an alarming shade of crimson. Whitmore remained eerily calm, but his hands clenched and unclenched on his reins. The magistrate, a thin, nervous-looking man, kept glancing between the parties as though hoping someone else would resolve this situation. Nicholas's posture never wavered. He stood like the manor itself, immovable, ancient, unbreakable. Finally, he turned and walked away, leaving the men at the gates. They departed shortly after, but the threat lingered like smoke in the air. When Nicholas returned to the study, his hands shook slightly as he poured brandy. Beatrice noticed the tremor, this crack in his controlled facade, and something in her chest tightened. "They'll return," he said quietly, "with proper documentation, legal authority to remove you forcibly." He drank, then set the glass down with deliberate care. "There's only one way to permanently remove you from your guardian's authority." Beatrice waited, though she already knew what he would say. "Marriage," Nicholas continued. "Once wed, your guardian loses all legal claim. Whitmore's engagement becomes void. The inheritance would be yours, or rather, technically your husband's under English law, but that can be addressed." "You're proposing?" It wasn't a question. "I'm presenting a solution." He finally looked at her directly, his scarred face illuminated by morning light. "A marriage of convenience. Protection in exchange for—" He paused. "I haven't thought that far." "What do you gain from this?" Beatrice asked. "You could simply hide me. Send me abroad. Why marry me?" Nicholas was quiet for a long moment. "For 4 years, I've existed in this manner. Not living, existing. Investigating Victoria's death. Avoiding society. Becoming the Gothic phantom they whisper about." His fingers traced the edge of his desk. "Perhaps companionship. An alliance. Someone who understands what it means to be hunted by those who should protect you." "That's not enough reason to marry a stranger." "No." He met her gaze. "But I see in you what I couldn't save in Victoria. She told me she was in danger, and I didn't believe her quickly enough, didn't act decisively enough." His voice roughened. "Let me save you instead. Let me be useful again." Beatrice studied him, this damaged baron with his scarred face and haunted eyes, offering her salvation at the cost of his own freedom. Because marriage was a cage, wasn't it? Even marriages of convenience. "Terms," she said. Something flickered in his expression. Relief? Respect? "Separate chambers," he said immediately. "Marriage in name only, unless we both choose otherwise at some future time. Your inheritance secured in your name through legal settlements. You'll be Baroness of Ashford with all attendant rights and protections, but free to live as you wish within those bounds. And if you wish to remarry, truly remarry someday, then we'll address it." He paused. "But I have no such plans. Victoria she was everything. I don't expect to find that again." The honesty in his voice made Beatrice's throat tighten. She thought of Whitmore's cold eyes, Guardian Thomas's calculating greed, the sanitarium that awaited her if she refused this offer. But more than that, she thought of Nicholas's kindness yesterday, his immediate belief in her story, the way he'd understood without explanation. "Yes," she said quietly, "I accept." The rest happened with startling speed. Nicholas dispatched riders to Exeter for a special license, baronial authority cutting through normal delays. By afternoon, the village priest had been summoned to Ashford's private chapel, a nervous man who kept glancing at Nicholas's scars and Beatrice's borrowed clothes. Mrs. Blackwell found a gown of sapphire silk, simpler than Beatrice's ruined bridal dress, but elegant nonetheless. Clara pinned her hair with shaking hands, tears streaming silently down her face. "It's all right," Beatrice whispered. "I'm choosing this." "I know, miss, my lady." Clara smiled through her tears. "I just wish it were different. You deserve romance, not refuge." Perhaps. But Beatrice had learned that survival mattered more than sentiment. The chapel was small, lit by afternoon sun through stained glass windows. Nicholas stood at the altar in black, his face solemn. Beatrice walked toward him alone. No one to give her away. No guests beyond Clara and Mrs. Blackwell as witnesses. The priest's words washed over her like water. She heard herself speak vows, felt Nicholas's scarred hand take hers as he slipped a gold ring onto her finger. Victoria's ring, she realized with a jolt. "I pronounce you man and wife." That was it. She was married. Again. Or rather, married for the first time, since this morning's ceremony had actually concluded. That evening, Nicholas escorted her to her chambers. He bowed formally at the threshold, his manner impeccably distant. "Good night, my lady," he said. "Beatrice," she replied. "If we're married, you might as well use my name." Something softened in his expression. "Good night, Beatrice." She closed the door and leaned against it, hearing his footsteps retreat down the corridor. Her wedding night, spent alone in a dead woman's room, married to a scarred stranger who'd saved her life. In the adjacent chamber, Nicholas stood at his own window, staring out at the darkened grounds. Somewhere beyond those gates, Guardian Thomas and Whitmore were plotting their next move. But it was too late now. The legal documents were signed, witnessed, binding. Beatrice Ashton no longer existed. In her place stood the Baroness of Ashford, free from her guardian's guardianship, beyond Whitmore's reach, protected by one of England's oldest titles, and absolutely terrified of what came next. 1 week into marriage, Beatrice had learned the rhythm of Ashford Hall. Breakfast at 9 in the solitary splendor of the dining room, mornings in the library where Nicholas worked on estate business while she read, luncheon, usually taken separately, afternoons walking the grounds with Clara, dinner at 8, formal and strained, where they discussed nothing of consequence. They were painfully polite strangers who happened to share a surname. On the 9th day, Beatrice found the investigation room. She'd been exploring the manor's north wing. No one had explicitly forbidden it, when she discovered a locked door. The key was in the lock. Inside, she found Nicholas's obsession made manifest. One entire wall was covered in notes, sketches, timelines. Victoria's last day documented minute by minute, lists of servants present that night, their movements, their possible motives. Financial records with certain entries circled in red ink. Newspaper clippings about the poisoning, about Victoria's death, about Nicholas's subsequent withdrawal from society. 4 years of investigation, covering every surface. "I should have locked that properly," Beatrice spun. Nicholas stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." "No." He entered, closing the door behind him. "You're my wife. You have a right to know what drives me." He gestured at the wall. "This is what I couldn't tell you before we married. That I'm half mad with it. That I can't let her death go unavenged." Beatrice studied the meticulous documentation. "You're not mad. You're right. Someone murdered her, and they've escaped justice." Something in his face shifted. "You believe me." "Of course I believe you." She turned to face him fully. "I know what it's like when everyone else thinks you're imagining danger. When they dismiss your instincts because it's inconvenient to believe you. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. Then Nicholas cleared his throat. "Dinner," he said. "Mrs. Blackwell will have prepared something." The dining room was lit by candles, the table set with silver and crystal. Mrs. Blackwell had outdone herself: roasted duck, glazed vegetables, fresh bread, and wine, ruby red in cut glass decanters. Nicholas poured for both of them, then paused. Beatrice watched, confused, as he lifted her glass to his nose, inhaling deeply. His expression darkened. "Don't drink this." "What?" He was already moving, calling for Pemberton, his voice sharp with command. Within minutes, the household physician had been summoned. Dr. Matthews, a serious man who'd served the Hartwell family for decades. "Laudanum," Dr. Matthews confirmed after testing the wine. "Substantial amount. Enough to cause severe illness? Possibly death depending on the lady's constitution." The room spun. Beatrice gripped the table edge, feeling bile rise in her throat. Someone had tried to poison her. In Nicholas's own home, at his own table. Who had access to this wine? Nicholas's voice was deadly quiet. Mrs. Blackwell looked stricken. "The footman, my lord. William, no, not William. The new one, Davies. He was assigned to the dining room this week. Fetch him, now." But Davies was gone. His quarters were empty, his few possessions vanished. On his pillow lay a single note, written in crude script. "Whitmore sends regards." Nicholas crumpled the paper in his scarred fist. Beatrice had never seen him truly angry before. His fury was cold, controlled, absolutely terrifying. "How was he hired?" Nicholas demanded. Pemberton consulted his records, face pale. "Recommendation came 4 weeks ago, my lord, from a gentleman in Somerset. I verified the reference. It seemed legitimate." "Before or after I brought Beatrice here?" "Before, my lord, but only just." "Whitmore was planning this." Beatrice's voice shook. "Even before I fled, he was positioning someone inside Ashford, in case I managed to escape to you." The realization was chilling. Whitmore had anticipated her every move, planned for every contingency. How much money was he willing to spend? How many people had he bribed? How far would he go? The next hours passed in a blur. Nicholas interrogated every servant, had the wine cellar inspected, every entrance to the manor secured. He moved through Ashford like an avenging angel, his controlled rage more frightening than any display of temper. Beatrice was ordered to her chambers. Dr. Matthews insisted she rest, though she'd drunk nothing. "Shock," he said. The body's response to near death. She lay in Victoria's bed. No, her bed now, staring at the canopy, trembling. Whitmore had reached her even here, in a barren stronghold. Nowhere was safe. Nowhere. She must have dozed, because she woke in darkness to find Nicholas sitting in the chair beside her bed. "What are you doing?" she whispered. "Ensuring you're alive." His voice was rough. "I can't. I won't lose someone else to poison." Victoria? Was poisoned deliberately. The evidence was there, but no one wanted to see it. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, face in his hands. "I should have protected her better. Should have believed her sooner. And now you—" Beatrice reached out before she could think better of it, her fingers finding his scarred hand. He flinched at the contact, but didn't pull away. "You saved me," she said quietly. "You smelled the laudanum. If you hadn't been cautious, if you hadn't tested the wine, I thought I'd lost you." The words burst from him, raw and unguarded. "For one moment, seeing that wine, I thought he'd succeeded, that I'd failed again." "But you didn't fail. I'm alive because of you." His hand turned in hers, scarred fingers intertwining with smooth ones. They sat like that in the darkness, connected by touch and terror, and something else neither was ready to name. Nicholas leaned closer. Beatrice's breath caught. His scarred face was inches from hers, his eyes dark with emotion she couldn't decipher. Her heart hammered as he raised his free hand toward her face. A knock shattered the moment. They sprang apart as Clara entered with a tea tray, her eyes widening at the scene. I'm sorry. Stay, Beatrice said, her voice unsteady. Please. Clara set down the tray, glancing between them. My lady, I need to show you something. Both of you. What she produced was a leather folio stuffed with papers. I've been documenting everything, Clara explained. Every letter between Mr. Whitmore and Lord Thomas that I could copy, every conversation I overheard, financial records from your guardian's study. I knew we'd need proof eventually. Nicholas took the folio, leafing through with increasing intensity. Clara, this is extraordinary. Bank transfers, correspondence with Dr. Pemberton, even a draft of the committal papers they plan to file. He looked up. You're a natural investigator. Clara flushed. I just knew Miss Beatrice, her ladyship, would need ammunition someday. We need more than defense, Nicholas said, standing. We need to attack. Whitmore won't stop. There's too much money at stake. £65,000 can buy a lot of assassins. What are you proposing? Beatrice asked. We investigate Whitmore, his past, his first wife's death, his financial dealings. We find evidence of his crimes and we destroy him publicly. Nicholas's scarred face was fierce in the candlelight. He wants to play hunter? I'll show him what it means to be hunted by a Hartwell. Beatrice stood as well, steadier now. Then we start tomorrow. We start tonight. Nicholas turned to Pemberton, who'd appeared in the doorway. Send for my investigators, every man I used to search for Victoria's killer, and double the manor guard. He looked at Beatrice, his expression softening slightly. He won't get another chance, Nicholas vowed. I'll destroy him first. 4 weeks later, Ashford Hall had transformed into the headquarters of a war campaign. Nicholas's investigators arrived daily with reports, documents, testimony. The investigation room expanded to consume an entire wing, its walls now covered with evidence of Whitmore's crimes spanning years. Beatrice had become Nicholas's partner in truth, not just in name. She helped organize documents, interviewed witnesses, traced financial connections with the sharp intelligence that had once been wasted on needlework and deportment lessons. The picture that emerged was monstrous. My lord, Pemberton appeared in the doorway, his expression grim. Mr. Richardson has returned from London. He says it's urgent. James Richardson was Nicholas's most skilled investigator, a former magistrate's clerk with connections throughout England's criminal underworld. He entered carrying a leather satchel stuffed with papers. I found her, he said without preamble. Whitmore's previous fiancée, Miss Margaret Thornton, daughter of a shipping merchant, engaged to Whitmore in 1828, worth £42,000. Beatrice's stomach clenched. What happened to her? Committed to Riverside Sanitarium 4 months after their wedding, died there 8 months later. Richardson produced a death certificate. Official cause, brain fever brought on by hysteria. The same pattern, Nicholas said quietly. Identical, my lord. But here's what's interesting. I bribed the sanitarium clerk. Got access to Miss Thornton's medical records. He laid out papers covered in physician's handwriting. She was perfectly healthy when committed. No signs of mental instability. The admitting physician was Dr. Harold Pemberton. The sanitarium director, Beatrice breathed. Dr. Thornton's superior. And Whitmore's business associate. Richardson produced bank statements. Whitmore paid Pemberton £7,000 the month Margaret Thornton died, exactly the same amount mentioned in the letter Clara intercepted. The room fell silent. Beatrice felt sick. Margaret Thornton, a woman she'd never met, dead 4 years, could have been her. Would have been her, if not for Clara's intervention. There's more, Richardson continued. I investigated the poisoning at Ashford. My lord, Whitmore wasn't just connected to it, he orchestrated it. Nicholas went very still. Explain. The man who supplied the poison, Samuel Green, deceased in a warehouse fire 7 months later, was Whitmore's business partner in a shipping venture. They'd insured cargo heavily, then arranged for ships to accidentally sink. Insurance fraud. When the scheme was discovered, Green needed to disappear. Richardson hesitated. Whitmore paid him to poison the wine. The plan was to make it look like an accident, collect insurance on assets. Victoria's death was collateral damage, Nicholas said, his voice hollow. I'm sorry, my lord. Yes. Richardson produced more documents. But it was profitable collateral. Whitmore collected £12,000 in commission from the insurance scheme. He profited from Lady Victoria's murder. Nicholas stood abruptly, his chair crashing backward. Without a word, he strode from the room. Beatrice found him an hour later in the investigation room, standing before the wall dedicated to Victoria's death. His hands trembled against the desk, scarred knuckles white with tension. 4 years, he said without turning. 4 years I've searched for her killer. And all this time, it was him, Whitmore. He murdered my betrothed for £12,000. Nicholas. I couldn't save her. His voice broke. I was traveling to London on business. I didn't even know the poisoning had happened until the servants sent word. By then, she was already... He stopped, shoulders shaking. Beatrice crossed to him, placing her hands on his back. She felt him stiffen, then collapse inward, grief pouring out of him in great wrenching sobs. She held him while he broke, while 4 years of controlled fury and carefully contained sorrow finally shattered. I couldn't save her, he repeated against her shoulder. But I can save you. I will save you. Beatrice pulled back enough to see his face, scarred, tear-streaked, beautiful in its anguish. You already have, she whispered. Every day I'm here, I'm alive because of you. Their eyes met. Something shifted in the air between them, grief transforming into desperate need. Nicholas's hand came up to cup her face, scarred fingers gentle against her cheek. Beatrice. She kissed him, claimed him, poured 4 weeks of longing and terror and gratitude into the press of her lips against his. He responded with equal desperation, pulling her closer, kissing her like she was air and he was drowning. His scars were rough beneath her fingers, his body solid and warm and alive. They were both alive despite everything, and that felt like victory enough. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Nicholas rested his forehead against hers. I don't want separate chambers anymore, Beatrice said. That night, she went to him. The Baron's chamber was larger than hers, dominated by a massive 4-poster bed. Nicholas stood by the window, still dressed, clearly not expecting her. Beatrice, I'm your wife, she said quietly. Not in name only, not anymore, if you want me. If I want you? His laugh was incredulous. God, Beatrice, I've wanted you since I pulled you from that coach. But I didn't want to pressure you. Didn't want you to feel obligated. She kissed him again, softer this time. I'm not obligated. I'm choosing this. Choosing you. What followed was tender and passionate and real, the true consummation of vows they'd spoken in awkward formality 4 weeks ago. Nicholas was careful with her, reverent, as though she might shatter. She showed him with hands and lips, and whispered words, that she was stronger than he feared. Afterward, they lay tangled together, her head on his scarred chest, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. What happens now? She murmured. Now we destroy him. Nicholas's voice was steady, determined. We have enough evidence to bring criminal charges. Whitmore will face trial for fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, and attempted murder. Morning brought awkward sweetness, uncertain smiles, touches that were both familiar and new. They dressed together. An intimacy Beatrice had never imagined wanting. Nicholas helped with her stays, his scarred fingers surprisingly deft. She tied his cravat, standing close enough to feel his heartbeat. They were partners now, in every sense. The solicitor arrived before noon, reviewing Richardson's evidence with growing excitement. My lord, this is extraordinary. We can prosecute, not just defend against his claims, but actually see him hanged. He paused. Clara's testimony will be crucial. Can she withstand cross-examination? She's stronger than she looks, Beatrice said. Then we proceed. The solicitor gathered his papers. I'll file charges this week. Pemberton appeared in the doorway, his face grave. My lord, a letter arrived by special courier from Whitmore's solicitor. Nicholas opened it, read, then passed it to Beatrice without comment. Mr. Edmund Whitmore requests formal hearing before ecclesiastical court. Claims marriage between Lady Beatrice Ashton and Nicholas Hartwell, Baron of Ashford, was coerced under duress. Seeks annulment on grounds of force and fraud. He's desperate, Nicholas said, attacking the marriage itself. Can he succeed? Not with the evidence we have. But Nicholas's jaw was tight. Though it means facing him in court, facing them both, Whitmore and your guardian. Beatrice took his scarred hand in hers. Then we faced them together. 3 weeks before the trial, Beatrice woke to the smell of smoke. For one confused moment, she thought she was dreaming. Then her eyes opened to darkness thick with gray haze, and terror slammed through her. Fire! She stumbled from bed, lungs already burning. The door, she grabbed the handle and pulled. Nothing. She tried again, panic rising. The door was jammed from the outside. Nicholas! Her scream tore at her throat. Nicholas! Smoke billowed under the door, growing thicker by the second. Beatrice fell to her knees, crawling toward the window. The West Wing. Just like Victoria. History repeating itself with ruthless precision. She reached the window, gasping for air that wasn't there. Her vision blurred. The room spun. Distantly, she heard shouting, footsteps. Nicholas's voice roaring her name. Then darkness. Nicholas had been sleeping peacefully, truly peacefully, for the first time in 4 years, when the smell of smoke jerked him awake. No, not again, not her. He was running before conscious thought caught up, barefoot and shirtless, terror making him faster than he'd ever moved. Beatrice's chamber. The hallway was already filling with smoke. Servants were shouting, forming bucket lines, but Nicholas only had eyes for one door, locked, jammed. He threw his shoulder against it once, twice, feeling wood splinter but not give. The old scars on his face and chest screamed with remembered agony. The poisoning's aftermath, Victoria's screams, flames everywhere. He kicked. The door frame cracked. One more kick and it burst inward. Smoke billowed out, choking him. Beatrice! He couldn't see, couldn't breathe. His hands found her by the window, collapsed against the wall, unconscious. Nicholas gathered her into his arms, turning back toward the hallway. Flames had spread, licking up the walls, consuming tapestries and wooden panels with terrifying speed. The path they'd need was blocked. The window, no choice. He carried Beatrice to the balcony, smoke searing his lungs. Below, servants had assembled with ladders, shouting instructions he couldn't hear over the roar of flames. His arms burned where sparks had caught his skin, fresh wounds layering over old scars. Take her. He lowered Beatrice over the balcony edge as carefully as he could manage. Hands reached up, guiding her down the ladder. Only when she was safe did Nicholas follow, his burned arms screaming protest with every movement. The manor staff fought through the night. By dawn, they'd saved most of Ashford, though the west wing was gutted, a charred skeleton against the morning sky. Dr. Matthews treated them both in Nicholas's study. Beatrice's lungs were damaged from smoke inhalation. Nicholas had fresh burns up both arms and across his back, places where embers had caught his bare skin. "You could have died," Beatrice whispered, her voice raw. "You ran into fire for me." Nicholas's laugh was bitter. "Did you think I wouldn't? Beatrice, watching you smile at breakfast is the only thing that makes me want to face each day. Of course I ran into fire for you." She started crying then, great, heaving sobs that made her damaged lungs ache. Nicholas pulled her against his chest, ignoring the pain from his burns, and held her while she shattered. "I saw him, my lord." Clara stood in the doorway, soot-streaked and furious. In her hands, she held a charred piece of cloth bearing a distinctive crest. "The footman who fled, Davies, he came back. I saw him in the West Wing just before the fire started." Her voice shook with rage. "He didn't see me, but I saw him. And I found this near the accelerant point." The crest belonged to Whitmore's household. "He tried to kill us both," Beatrice said. "Eliminate the witnesses before trial." "He failed." Nicholas's voice was deadly quiet. "And now we have attempted murder to add to the charges." 1 week to recover. 7 days of tender care and mounting fury and preparation for the battle ahead. They traveled to London in Nicholas's carriage, Beatrice still weak, Nicholas's arms wrapped in bandages beneath his coat. The royal courts of justice loomed before them, Gothic architecture that matched their story, all stone and shadows and the promise of judgment. The courtroom was packed. Every scandalmonger in London had come to witness the Baron of Ashford's fight against the man who'd tried to murder his wife. Whitmore sat with his solicitor, his face a mask of false composure. Beside him, Guardian Thomas looked crimson with rage and fear. Nicholas's legal team was led by Sir William Blackstone, the finest barrister in England. He rose, and the courtroom fell silent. "My lords, we will demonstrate that Mr. Edmund Whitmore engaged in a systematic conspiracy to defraud and murder Lady Beatrice Hartwell, Baroness of Ashford. Furthermore, we will prove his connection to the death of Victoria Somerset, late betrothed of Nicholas Hartwell, Baron of Ashford, killed in 1829. What followed was a masterclass in legal destruction. First, the financial records. £10,000 in payments from Whitmore to Lord Thomas, documented in Clara's meticulous copies. Guardian Thomas's face drained of color as his gaming debts were exposed. His embezzlement from Beatrice's trust revealed. Then Dr. Harold Pemberton, brought in shackles to testify. The sanitarium director broke under questioning, admitting to decades of false commitments for profit. His records showed Margaret Thornton, Whitmore's previous fiancée, had been healthy when admitted, then systematically starved and drugged until her death. "How much did Mr. Whitmore pay you?" Sir William asked. £7,000, Pemberton whispered. For Margaret. Another 7,000 was promised for the next one. The courtroom erupted. The judge's gavel cracked like thunder. Clara testified next, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. She presented every letter, every overheard conversation, every piece of damning evidence she'd collected. The forged medical assessments Whitmore had prepared before the wedding. The correspondence with Dr. Pemberton about disposal methods. Then Beatrice took the stand. She was pale, her voice still rough from smoke damage. But she spoke clearly, telling her story with devastating composure. The drowning of her parents, Guardian Thomas's cold guardianship, Whitmore's dead eyes, the morning she discovered the truth and fled for her life. "He didn't want me," she said quietly. "He wanted my inheritance, and when I became inconvenient, he tried to burn me alive in my bed." Whitmore's solicitor tried to interrupt, but Sir William produced evidence of Davies's employment, the accelerant used, the jammed door. Attempted murder, premeditated, and brutal. Finally, Nicholas testified about Victoria. The courtroom fell absolutely silent as he described the poisoning 4 years ago, his betrothed's death, his long investigation, the connection to Whitmore's insurance fraud scheme. Samuel Green, Whitmore's partner, paid to supply the poison. "My betrothed discovered their fraud," Nicholas said, his scarred face terrible in its control. 3 days later, she was dead. Whitmore profited £12,000 from her murder. Guardian Thomas had an apoplectic fit when the judge called for his arrest. He clutched his chest, face crimson, raging about conspiracies and lies. No one moved to help him. Whitmore attempted to flee. He made it 3 steps before bailiffs restrained him, dragging him back as he screamed about his rights, his innocence, the unfairness of it all. The judge's ruling was swift and merciless. The marriage between Nicholas Hartwell, Baron of Ashford, and Lady Beatrice Ashton is valid and binding. Mr. Edmund Whitmore is remanded to custody, charged with conspiracy to commit fraud and murder. Lord Thomas Ashton is stripped of all authority and will face separate criminal proceedings. He looked directly at Beatrice. "My lady, your inheritance is secured completely in your name, free from any guardianship or constraint." The gavel fell. It was over. They exited the courthouse to a cheering crowd. News had spread through London. The dramatic rescue, the evil conspiracy, the baron who'd saved his bride from fire and corruption. People lined the streets, calling blessings, throwing flowers. Beatrice leaned against Nicholas, exhausted and triumphant. His bandaged arms circled her waist, holding her steady. "We won," she whispered. "We survived," he corrected. "Together." Dear friends, you've journeyed with Beatrice and Nicholas through series of danger, love, and triumph. If their story has touched you, please subscribe to The Duchess's Secret and leave a comment sharing your favorite moment. Your support is what allows me to continue sharing these tales with you, and I read every single comment with gratitude. 7 weeks after the trial, Beatrice stood before her mirror, smoothing the silk of her gown with trembling hands. The burns on Nicholas's arms had faded to pink scars, layered over old white ones. Her lungs no longer ached with every breath. They were healing, both of them, but some wounds ran deeper than flesh. "You don't have to do this," Nicholas said from the doorway. "We can send regrets to the Duchess of Somerset." "No." Beatrice turned to face him. I'm tired of hiding, tired of letting fear dictate my choices. He crossed to her, devastatingly handsome in formal black. 4 years of exile had ended tonight. They were attending the season-opening ball together, facing society as Baron and Baroness of Ashford. The ballroom was ablaze with candlelight and jewels. Every gossip-monger in London had come to witness the scandalous couple's first public appearance. Beatrice felt their stares like physical touches, curious, judgmental, hungry for fresh drama. Nicholas's hand tightened on hers. "Steady," he murmured. "They can't touch you. Not anymore." They should have found a quiet corner, made polite conversation, gradually eased back into society. Instead, Nicholas led her directly to the center of the dance floor. The orchestra fell silent. Hundreds of eyes turned toward them. Beatrice's heart hammered against her stays. Nicholas released her hand and turned to address the room, his scarred face proud and unapologetic. "I have spent 4 years hiding," he announced, his damaged voice carrying perfectly in the sudden stillness. "From society, from life, from happiness. I became a phantom haunting my own manor, convinced I deserved nothing more." Whispers rippled through the crowd. The Duchess of Somerset looked torn between scandal and delight. "Then this extraordinary woman sought refuge in my coach," Nicholas continued, turning to Beatrice. "She was fleeing a wedding that would have killed her, and in saving her, she saved me." Beatrice's eyes burned with tears she refused to shed. "You gave me back my life, Beatrice." His voice softened, intimate despite their audience. "Let me give you something in return, a future without fear, without shame, without anything but absolute devotion." He kissed her, deeply, scandalously, in the center of the Duchess of Somerset's ballroom, while society watched in shock. For one endless moment, silence reigned. Then someone started clapping. The Duchess of Somerset herself, laughing with delight. Others joined until the entire ballroom erupted in applause. The orchestra struck up a waltz. Nicholas swept Beatrice into his arms, and they danced while hundreds watched. The scarred baron and his rescued baroness, claiming their place in society without apology. "That was insane," Beatrice whispered, breathless. "That was necessary." Nicholas smiled, and it transformed his scarred face into something beautiful. "No more hiding, not for either of us." 4 months later, scene. Beatrice woke feeling ill. By afternoon, the physician had confirmed what she'd suspected. She was with child. Nicholas's reaction was everything she could have hoped: joy, terror, fierce protectiveness. He immediately ordered renovations to the nursery, interviewed wet nurses, drove everyone half mad with his preparations. News arrived that same week. Whitmore had died in Newgate Prison. Officially, jail fever. But whispers suggested his criminal partners had silenced him before he could implicate others. Beatrice felt nothing at the news. No satisfaction, no grief. Whitmore had become irrelevant the moment the judge's gavel fell. Guardian Thomas lived in disgrace in Wales, his estate seized to pay creditors. Beatrice had no contact with him. Some wounds didn't merit healing. Clara became head housekeeper at Ashford and godmother-to-be, her loyalty rewarded with position and security. She'd found her own purpose, managing the manor with quiet efficiency while documenting everything for the book she planned to write. 9 months after the trial, Beatrice stood in the newly completed nursery, watching her husband hold their daughter. Victoria Margaret Hartwell had arrived during an April storm, screaming her fury at the world. She had Nicholas's dark hair and Beatrice's green eyes, and she'd wrapped them both around her tiny finger within moments. Nicholas sang softly, a lullaby his own mother had taught him. His scarred hands cradled their daughter with infinite gentleness. The burns from the fire had healed into new scars, but he wore them differently now, not as marks of tragedy, but as testimony to survival. "She's asleep," Beatrice whispered. "I don't want to put her down yet." Nicholas looked up, his face transformed by wonder. "I keep thinking I'll wake up and discover this was a dream." "It's real." Beatrice crossed to them, resting her hand on his shoulder. "We're real." Clara appeared in the doorway, smiling. "Tea in the drawing room, my lord and lady, when you're ready." They eventually settled Victoria in her cradle and descended together, Nicholas's arm around Beatrice's waist. In the drawing room, newspapers were stacked on the table. Reports of the parliamentary inquiry Beatrice had funded into private sanitariums. Dr. Pemberton's trial had exposed systemic corruption. Reforms were being debated. Women were being freed from false imprisonment. Margaret Thornton's death wouldn't be meaningless. Victoria's murder wouldn't go unmarked. Beatrice had transformed her pain into purpose. That evening they walked the manor grounds together, Victoria sleeping against Nicholas's chest in a sling Clara had fashioned. They passed the carriage house, and Beatrice paused, studying the elegant black vehicle with its silver hawk crest. "That coach saved my life," she said quietly. "You saved your own life." Nicholas shifted Victoria gently. "You chose to run, chose to trust me, chose to fight rather than surrender." "We saved each other." Beatrice leaned against him, careful not to disturb their sleeping daughter. "I fled toward the unknown and found everything I'd never dared to hope for." Nicholas kissed the top of her head. "Sometimes the most dangerous journey leads to the safest harbor." They stood there as twilight deepened, watching bats swoop through the gathering darkness. Ashford Hall rose behind them, no longer a Gothic prison, but a home filled with laughter and purpose and fierce love. Beatrice had been taught from birth that a woman's role was to be decorative, obedient, convenient. She'd learned instead that a woman could be brave, strategic, powerful. That survival sometimes demanded you trust a stranger more than those who claimed to love you. That love could grow from necessity into something transcendent. The coach stood silent in its house, waiting for the next journey. But Beatrice's running days were over. She'd fled from captivity and found freedom, fled from death and found life, fled from a loveless marriage and found a partnership that transformed them both. Sometimes when you run from the life others designed for you, you discover the life you were always meant to have, and sometimes, rarely, miraculously, you find it in the most unexpected places. In a scarred baron's coach, in his wounded heart, in the fierce determination to survive against impossible odds. Beatrice had sought refuge and found a home, had sought safety and found purpose, had sought escape and found, instead, everything. Thank you for journeying with Beatrice and Nicholas through their tale of danger, love, and redemption. If this story moved you, please like, subscribe to The Duchess's Secret, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support means everything.